I never knew my grandfather. He worked until he retired and he died shortly afterwards when I was about 1 year old. After his retirement from work, he suffered a massive heart attack, and so the wonderful retirement that he had planned with my grandmother was gone. And this happened to so many people in his generation that I know my parents and many others in that generation decided that they would retire as early as possible so they could spend those golden years of their lives with their families. In my life before Parliament, I was the owner of a small coach touring company, and we used to take lots of people, mainly in that sort of 50-plus age group, all around Australia, and we would provide employment in regional areas through tourism services and hospitality services. And it was an important contribution that those people felt that they could make to the economic life of our nation. Even though they were no longer working for a living, they were actually providing income for others in our community through their consumption of services. Times have changed since then. When we were in business early on, interest rates were high, which was hard on homeowners and mortgage people, but it was good for self-funded retirees and those on lower incomes that were able to put a little bit of money aside and save it and get the interest. But these days, self-funded retirees have very little income coming to them, 2-3% if they're lucky, so it creates a real burden for them. And the other thing that's happening is this changing idea of how long we should work for. So when I joined the public service in 1992 as a 21-year-old, I found out 5 years later that I actually had another 4 or 5 years extra to work than when I started my working life, because of the change and equalisation of men's and women's working lives, which is a fair thing. We want to have 50% for women and 50% for men. But at the same time, I think taking it to 70, as our current government is doing, is making it too hard for those older Australians who can't get work. We need to look at the people in our community who are over 50 who feel consigned to the scrap heap. My father took a voluntary redundancy when he was about 55 and he was trying to get back into the workplace. During that time that he was on his VR, my mother was not allowed to talk about work in the home because it was something that my dad didn't want to engage with. He didn't want to admit that he could no longer provide for his family. And I see so many people in my electorate office who are suffering now because they can't actually get employment. They have been unemployed for a number of years. I've got a woman in my electorate who moved from Sydney to Maitland just merely to get a cheaper house so that she could support herself and her family because she cannot find a job. And these people are hidden people in our unemployment figures. They're the silent, invisible people that we don't know about because their husbands or their wives work or their partners, and they're not able to actually get into the figures to be shown as someone who is in our community, who is wanting to be productive, who's wanting to contribute to our community, wanting to contribute to our economic development as a nation. And we need to be able to access these people more readily. When they go and see employment services, because everything's privatised now, they find it very hard to get anyone who'll actually give them a hearing, who'll listen to them, who'll help them develop a winning CV to get that job because they're too old or because the skills that they had when they were 20 are no longer relevant these days. I also see many older Australians coming to me who are the victims of workers' compensation cases who will never work again. And it's not really because there was a workers' compensation case as such, but really because their injury has meant that they are no longer able to do the work that they were trained to do. And when you have governments like the Liberal government in New South Wales who will then charge them exorbitant fees to retrain themselves, or our federal government that wants to charge them $100,000 if they want to get a new degree, it makes it really difficult for those people to retrain. And so for them, an injury in their late working life means that they will never work again. Our community owes something to those older Australians, and it should be about dignity. It should be about recognising the work that they put in their hours as volunteers. Many of grandparents these days are providing caring responsibilities for their grandchildren, which again is not recognised. A lot of older Australians are actually providing care to either partners or even their own parents who are still alive. You know, I can contrast my situation with having one living grandparent throughout my childhood with my children who had 5 great-grandparents. And the load... Thank you. Sorry? Yeah. So I contrast that with my own children who have 5 great-grandparents and the load that has put on their grandparents and my parents in terms of providing care to that older generation. So we have to recognise that old age these days is a very complicated time of life, and it's not one that we should just be looking at as work a bit harder, work a bit longer and it'll all be all right, but actually giving people dignity and choice in age. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.